Demonstrations in Israel against Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu after the bodies of 6 Israeli captives were found in Gaza. The deaths have intensified public anger and political pressure on the Israeli leader. So what will this mean for the war on Gaza? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the program. I am Hashim Ahalbara. Israel has killed more than 40,000 Palestinians in Gaza, but it's been the plight of Israeli captives that's driving domestic political pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu. 6 more of them have been killed. Hamas says by Israel, Israel says by Hamas. The discovery of their bodies on Saturday brought fury and anguish in Israel. Grief has been driven by the heartbreaking stories of their families told across the world by relatives and friends. But there's added despair that some of the dead captives were due to be released under a ceasefire agreement, which Netanyahu is blamed for stalling and blocking. That's despite a UN Security Council resolution backing the deal. So is the political pressure on Netanyahu more serious than before? What will he do in response? We'll get to our guest shortly. First, this report from Kulsum Sharif.
Chaos in Israel. A major strike against the government's failure to bring home the captives being held in Gaza led to closures and disruptions. The first strike since the start of Israel's war on Gaza in October aimed to increase pressure on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to agree to a deal. Within hours, Israel's Labour Court ordered the industrial action to end. But the public anger against the government's handling of the crisis remains. It comes after a day of mass protests when tens of thousands poured into the streets in grief and anger after 6 captives were found dead in southern Gaza on Sunday. From Tel Aviv to West Jerusalem, their families and many in the public blame Netanyahu for failing to make a deal with Hamas.
We are very, very sad and very, very angry about our government, that all they does is care about their position in the government. It doesn't care about the hostages and doesn't do anything in order to release them. The deal should have been signed a long time ago, and these people for sure, like many others, could have been saved.
Israel's military said the bodies of the 6 captives were recovered from a tunnel, saying they were killed not long before Israeli forces reached them. 3 of them would have been among the first to be released as part of a ceasefire deal under negotiation. Hamas says Israel was responsible for their deaths, but Netanyahu accused Hamas for stalling negotiations.
Those who kill hostages do not want an agreement. We will not rest and we will not be silent. We will hunt you down, we will catch you, and we will settle the score.
US President Joe Biden offered his condolences to 23-year-old Israeli-American Hirsch Goldberg Pollen's family, who is among the captives killed. Biden has threatened to make Hamas leaders pay for the crimes. In 11 months, the Israeli military has killed more than 40,000 Palestinians in Gaza in a war aided by US weapons. While calls to end the war have failed so far, the deaths of the 6 Israeli captives could pile more pressure on Netanyahu to agree to a deal to save the remaining captives. Kulsum Sharif, Al Jazeera, for Inside Story.
Let's bring in our guests. They're all joining us from Tel Aviv. Yossi Belin is a former Israeli cabinet minister who initiated the Oslo peace process in 1992. Akiva Eldar is political analyst and veteran journalist. Ori Goldberg is a political commentator and former academic specializing in Middle East studies. Welcome to the program. Yossi, is this the moment many were saying in the past, if it happens, it could be conducive to a significant political change that could end the war and bring about a political settlement and a truce?
Yeah, I agree that it might be a very crucial moment if there is an agreement about the release of the hostages, or the end of the war in Gaza, and talking about the future steps about who will replace Hamas when the leadership of Hamas is not ruling the place. So far, there is no such agreement, and my hope is that the Americans, who are playing here a very, very crucial role, will come with their own ideas. They spoke about, there were rumors about putting such a page for both sides towards the end of this week, and I hope that this will happen, because if the Americans are doing it, no one can really ignore something like that, even if there is no agreement to this agreement.
Akiva, the Labour Court's decision to end the strike earlier than the organisers were planning to see happen, is it in a way taking the steam out of the momentum which has been building up over the last few days?
Well, actually, first of all, I am afraid, and actually I was afraid when I first heard about it, that Netanyahu and his followers will use it to argue that it's about politics and not about the captives, but it's the Labour Party, it's the usual suspects from the protest against the so-called reform, because Arnon Ben David, the chairman of the Stadrut, was also a participant in the rallies against this reform that I call it coup d'etat. I believe that, first of all, I agree with Yossi that it has to come also from the Americans, from the Europeans, and maybe even from the Arab community, the members of the Abraham Accord. The Israeli public needs to get the idea that it has something to lose. It's not only the lives of the captives. Unfortunately, this is not enough. So I really believe that we need more than that.
Ori, when the strike was announced by the largest trade union, the Histadrut, people said, wait a second, this could bear some resemblance to the March 2023 protest movement that forced Netanyahu to abandon a plan to reform the judiciary system. Is that same momentum that could either bring about a settlement or bring the government down? Or do you think it's exaggerated?
I don't know if it's exaggerated, and I can't vouch for the ultimate results. But I can say that the vibe in Israel has shifted. The Israeli collective is in a different state than it was 48 hours ago. Again, I don't know if it's enough to topple the government or to force a hostage deal. I doubt that it is, but I do think there's a difference. I think that the death of these 6 hostages, that a lot of people here, perhaps the majority of Israelis, see as utterly preventable and very, very frustrating. I think the lesson that has sunk into the Israeli collective mind is that this government is truly lethal to Israelis, not just the Palestinians. I think people now feel a sense of urgency about this government's time in office, about how much more damage it can do. Again, this isn't conclusive. This isn't the tipping point, but I think it is a tipping point. And I think it's quite an important one, regardless of the ultimate results.
Yossi, could you explain to us why is Netanyahu still insisting that it's too early, too risky to go for a deal with Hamas, when the general consensus in Israel, particularly after the killing of the 6 captives, is that there has to be a deal immediately?
Well, first of all, it's too much to ask from me to explain what Netanyahu thinks. I would say the following. On the one hand, the mood yesterday, and not only yesterday, is against the government. The government doesn't have a majority, as you know, in the public opinion polls for months and months. And a call for the resignation of the government and the security leaders and so on and so forth. On the other hand, since it doesn't happen, and since the government in a parliamentarian regime in a democracy is dependent on the parliament, and in the parliament they do have a majority, what we are doing, all of us, is actually trying to convince the current government or to put pressure on the current government to go for a deal. It is not very easy. I mean, what happened to us on October the 7th last year is a catastrophe, and I think that none of us has recovered since from that. And on the Palestinian side, of course, I mean, the many innocent people were killed. It's the 40,000 number includes, by the way, tens of thousands of Hamas combatants. But even if the number is smaller, it is a big number. People are suffering on both sides, and we have to put an end to it. And what can help putting end to it, I believe, is only an American proposal.
Akiva, the reason why I'm asking these questions is because we'd like to unpack in a way the political landscape in Israel. Is it Netanyahu who is the decisive factor when it comes to what happens next, or do you think it's ultimately Ben Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich who will have to have the final say?
I think that we are giving Netanyahu a big discount when we put the onus on Ben Gvir and Smotrich. Actually, you have to listen to Netanyahu. He really believes that his mission, I can't say from God because he believes that he is God. His mission is to prevent a two-state solution. He really believes all those years that he has to undermine the Oslo Agreement. He has to maintain the management of the conflict. There is no solution to it. That's the reason that he supported Hamas, because they are actually twins. So Netanyahu will not end the conflict. And what we see now is that it is spreading to the West Bank. Of course, it goes to Lebanon. And Netanyahu will not stop the war if he's not forced to do this, because it's not only Ben Gvir and Smotrich, it's his ideology and also his personal interest, because the end of the war may be the end of his career. Let's remind the viewers that he has to stand to show up in court on December 1st, and this may be the beginning of his end, political end.
Ori, Netanyahu and his far-right allies argue that a deal now with concessions to Hamas is going to be flawed and will compromise Israel's national security. Is this a general consensus among all the Israelis?
No, I don't think that it is. But you have to understand that there's a difficulty here, a conceptual difficulty. I think most Israelis understand that at the moment Hamas is not a security threat or an existential threat to Israel. I think they understand the relative advantage that Israel has, the superiority that Israel has militarily. The problem is that Israelis can't conceive and have not been presented with a solution to the quote-unquote Hamas problem that doesn't involve a war. The thing that happened on Saturday was that since the beginning of the war, Israel has defined two goals for this war. One was the return of the hostages, the other was the destruction of Hamas. For about 11 months, the Netanyahu government managed to persuade Israelis who thought so to begin with, that these two goals were complementary, that one helped the other. What happened on Saturday, the discovery of these 6 hostages, the understanding that their deaths were very much preventable, that they could have been rescued alive, they could have returned to their families. What happened was that this immediate connection between the destruction of Hamas and the return of the hostages snapped, I think, in the collective mind. There are still people who believe this to be the case, but I think Israelis now understand that there is an innate contradiction between the two. And the anger over the disregard for the welfare of the hostages is now probably as great as it has ever been, because Israelis understand how this disregard was used to promote security. All Israelis think of security as the most sacred item on the agenda. But I think for the first time in a long time, way up a period of time that way exceeds the length of this war, Israelis now understand that their own government can use security against them.
Yossi, October the 7th has created a new political reality in Israel. Now, when it comes to the peace or to the truce agreement. Is Israel willing to go for an agreement that is going to bring a permanent ceasefire, an end to the war, and by extension, somehow could mean that Hamas might have a presence in Gaza? Because the moment you say no more fighting, we don't know at this extent whether Hamas still has significant military capability operating in Gaza.
Israel cannot accept the fact that Hamas may go on and lead Gaza. We will not recognize it. They will not ask us to recognize it because they don't recognize the right of Israel to exist. So there is no dilemma. And I think that from day one, after October the 7th, our only target should have been to prevent Hamas from returning to power in the Gaza Strip. So they are not partners and they don't want to become partners for peace. They don't believe in the two-state solution, of course, and so on and so forth. Our partner is the PLO. With the PLO, we signed our agreements, and we should sign it in the future. And I believe that there is a potential of an Arab coalition with the PLO and Israel to try and solve the problems in the region, make peace, and recover Gaza itself. If Hamas is becoming part of the PLO and accepts the PLO resolutions, then it is another story, and then it will not be impossible, in my view, to continue and talk to the PLO, even if they are there. Otherwise, they cannot be partners.
Akiva, what kind of influence does the Hostages and Missing Families Forum have in Israel? Do they have any sort of moral leverage that could be conducive to a settlement, or at least forcing Netanyahu to say it's about time to listen to these people?
You know, Hashem, by now, the faces of the captives as well as their relatives are kind of members of our own families. They, you go out to the street, you take the highway, you see their faces. If you ask the Israeli public what is the price that they will be willing to pay to bring them back, they will say everything, including ending the war. However, as I said before, ending the war for Netanyahu is ending his career. So I believe that Yossi's analysis is absolutely clear. But the solution, the two-state solution, unfortunately, doesn't exist anymore. As long as the United States is not willing to play the major game and to force the parties and to force Israel to negotiate with the PLO, we will see more bloodshed. So I really don't believe that with all the respect to the campaign of the families, and it's a great campaign. I was yesterday standing there with the flag, and I keep demonstrating every weekend. But Netanyahu doesn't listen. His constituency believe that we, the people who are asking to end the war, which is the only solution. If we don't end the war, we will not get them back. They believe that we support Sinwar. They actually say it. So this is what Netanyahu does best, is divide and rule.
Ori, one of the key elements of the agreement of the disagreement about the truce is Hamas insisting that Israel has to pull out completely from Gaza, and particularly from the Philadelphia corridor. Now, when you have the leaders of the key security institutions, the army, Shin Bet, and the Mossad, saying that they are open to the idea of a pullout from Philadelphia, except for Benjamin Netanyahu and his allies. Is it because they see there is a divide in the society and they're using that to their own political advantage?
No, actually, in contrast to my two colleagues here, I don't think that Netanyahu is enforcing an extremist agenda. I think that Netanyahu is a wise politician, and I think he recognizes that the Israeli public has no alternative to the notion of war. That the only solution that the Israeli public can conceive of with regard to Hamas and its presence in Gaza is war. And in that sense, Netanyahu, I think, as long as he prolongs the war, he doesn't only escape from his trial or ensure the survival of his coalition. I think he also enjoys a kind of a get out of jail free card as far as the Israeli public is concerned, despite the great dislike for him. Israelis don't like Netanyahu, but they don't have any real alternative to his policy. There are no Jewish politicians who are offering any sort of alternative that doesn't include more war, either in Gaza or in Lebanon. So in that sense, I think Netanyahu is finding all kinds of ways to obfuscate and to obstruct the end of the war, because the war doesn't, again, just give him personal benefits. It lets him enjoy a consensus that allows him to continue to rebuild his strength as a candidate who may not be well liked, who a lot of Israelis consider somebody who is making rational choices. I think a lot of Israelis would like the war to end. I don't think Israelis are capable of saying it. They still aren't.
Yossi, you're one of the architects of the Oslo peace process, which led to the establishment of the Palestinian Authority. You've been instrumental in the bailing Abu Mazen in understandings, and also the Taba talks in 2001, the Geneva Accords 2003, all in the hope of a final settlement. After October the 7th, do you think that those who have the same hope for a better life for both the Israelis and the Arabs were completely decimated, won't have any say in the near future, therefore they need either to reinvent themselves or turn a chapter on what they believed in for quite some time?
Well, those who know history know that most of the peace treaties were signed after war. And in our case, it will be, as I said before, signed between us and the PLO, not between us and the perpetrators of the October the 7th. But the general feeling on both sides, on the Palestinian side and on the Israeli side, is distrust, mistrust, and hatred more than a day before October the 7th. Does it mean that it is the end of the wish of so many people in the region to have peace? No. Does it mean that they are not a little bit more disillusioned about peace? Yes. But it depends first and foremost on the leaders. If there are other leaders on the Israeli side, and we know how Netanyahu has a support of 25-30%. He doesn't have a consensus. He's not a consensual leader. Even if people who don't support him say, okay, who can replace him, they know that there are other people like Gantz, like Lapid, who are waiting there, who could prove themselves and maybe the prime minister. Lapid himself just a year and a half ago went to the UN Assembly General and spoke about the two-state solution as the only solution. Gantz is referring to it in a more indirect way. So to say that it is the funeral of peace, I'm not there.
Okay. Akiva, the Americans are likely to present what they're describing now as a take or leave proposal for the sake of an end to the truce. Do you think that they still have any kind of leverage when they have been failing over the last few months to bring about a deal?
I hope that it can happen right after the American elections. I remember that during the transition period, President Reagan started the dialogue between the United States and the PLO, which brought about the Madrid process and then the Oslo Agreement. After the elections, Biden will still be at the White House with unlimited power to do whatever he likes, and he can take all the blame from the Jewish lobby, from Israel, and may force on Israel to put an end to the settlement project, because it's not only about the war in Gaza. We have to look at the broader picture. And if there will be on the table, which is on the shelf right now, the Arab Peace Initiative, which will offer Israel ultimate peace, normalization with all the Arab states, and some kind of a NATO agreement in the Middle East with American guarantees, this is the only, I believe, this can be a tiebreaker, because right now, if you look at the poll that I saw a few days ago, an Israeli think tank, more than 15% of the Israeli youngsters believe that the citizens of Israel shouldn't have the right to vote. So we have to change this atmosphere.
Ori, briefly, if you don't mind, the Americans, the Israelis, the Europeans have been saying for quite some time, Gaza has to be run by Hamas, should be defeated. Palestinian Authority has to have a presence in Gaza backed by wealthy Arab nations. Is this something that could happen in the near future? Is it feasible? Is it something that could be conducive to an everlasting peace with the Arabs?
I doubt it. And in contrast to what both Akiva and Yossi said, I think most of the words upon which this discourse was constructed over the last 20 or 30 years have lost their meaning. I don't think anybody knows what peace means after what Israel did to Gaza and after what Hamas did to Israel. I think everything will have to be re-examined and reordered. I hope that an American proposal can bring a semblance of peace for several weeks. I think we're going to have to take this very, very small steps over a long period of time, but we have to start somewhere. Grand plans for peace or an Arab or Middle Eastern coalition does seem to me to be extremely far-fetched.
We have to leave it there. Yossi Belling, Akiva Eldar.